October 25th, 1944. Off the coast of Samar in the Philippine Sea. The first light of dawn breaks over a restless Pacific. Wind ripples across grey water. On the tiny escort carrier USS Fanshaw Bay, sailors in oil-stained dungarees are already at their battle stations. The air smells of aviation fuel, sweat and salt. At 0645, a radar operator's voice cracks through the static. Multiple surface contacts, bearing 320 degrees, range 30 miles. Lieutenant Commander Ernest Evans of the USS Johnston, a small destroyer screening the formation, freezes. He knows what those words mean. The Japanese are coming, but it can't be. According to every briefing, the Imperial Japanese Navy's battleships had been smashed days ago at Surigao Strait. This must be a mistake. Then the radio bursts to life. Higher command, urgent, terrified enemy surface force of major proportions approaching from the north. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers closing fast. On the horizon, the morning haze glows faintly red. It isn't sunrise, it's gunfire. 12,000 yards away, the sea erupts with geysers of water. Shells, 15 inches wide, scream through the air at twice the speed of sound. The first salvos land long, but each one walks closer. The men of Task Unit 77.4. 3 call sign. Taffy 3 are staring into the maw of the most powerful surface fleet Japan has left Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force. Behind those gun flashes are 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers and 11 destroyers. Among them, the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, her guns capable of hurling 3 200-pound shells over 20 miles. Facing them 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. None with armor, none with big guns. Most without enough speed to outrun what's coming. Aboard the USS White Plains, Captain Ernest Sample stares through binoculars and mutters to no one in particular. They're battleships, all right, we're done for. But the sailors of Taffy 3 don't surrender. They look to their commanders, to Jughead Sprague aboard the Fanshaw Bay and to Ernest Evans aboard the Johnston, a Cherokee from Oklahoma who has never met a fight he didn't charge into. Evans turns to his helmsman. All ahead flank, he orders. Let's give 'em hell. The Johnston surges forward, a single greyhound charging a pack of wolves. The war's most lopsided naval battle has begun. 0, 6, 4, 8 hours. The destroyer USS Johnston DD 557 shudders as her turbines roar to full speed, her bow cleaving through the rising swells. Men on deck brace themselves against the vibration of steel and adrenaline. Lieutenant Commander Ernest Evans grips the bridge railing, squinting toward the horizon. He can now see the towering columns of water from Japanese shell fire, each one closer than the last. Range to target, Evans barks. 18,000 yards and closing, sir, comes the reply from fire control. Evans knows the odds. Johnston's 5-inch guns can barely scratch a battleship's paint at that range. But they can lay smoke and they can bite. He orders, make smoke, bring up the torpedoes. The sky darkens as thick grey plumes pour from Johnston's funnels, billowing into a twisting wall of concealment for the tiny American carriers behind them. Over the intercom, Evans' voice cuts through the chaos. We're going in. Give those carriers a fighting chance. From the flight decks of USS Gambier Bay and USS Street, low pilots rush to their planes, FM-2 Wildcats and TBM Avengers aircraft built for anti-submarine patrols, not duels with battleships. Mechanics kick away wheel chocks and engines snarl to life. One pilot, Lieutenant J.G. Thomas Brown, sprints up the ladder, heart hammering. As his Wildcat rolls forward, he hears someone shout from the deck, "Bring back a battleship, Tommy." At 07000 hours, the first shells find their mark. A 15-inch round from Yamato lands a mere 50 yards off Johnston's starboard bow, the concussion slamming sailors to the deck and showering the bridge with salt water. Metal groans. A fragment slices through a gunner's arm. Evans doesn't flinch. "Open fire," he yells. The destroyer's 5-inch mounts erupt in flames, spitting out shells at 15 rounds per minute. Each one arcs high, bursting against the forward superstructure of the cruiser Kumano. Sparks blossom along her hull. "Direct hit," someone cries. But Johnston is already committed alone, cutting diagonally across the Japanese line, setting up for a torpedo run. Overhead, the first American aircraft claw skyward through tracer fire, their machine guns blazing in defiance. Behind Johnston, two more destroyers, USS Howell and USS Heermann, swing hard to follow her lead. They are smaller, slower, but just as defiant. From their decks, sailors watch Evans charge into the wall of steel and fire and realize the impossible is now expected. "Look at that madman," a Howell crewman mutters. "He's fighting the whole damn Imperial Navy." At 0712, Johnston reaches torpedo range. "Fire," Evans commands. 10 mark, 1-5 torpedoes streak into the sea, their wakes glowing white. 30 seconds later, 2 explosions shudder through the ocean. The Kumano's bow lifts skyward, a gaping hole ripped clean through. Flames engulf her forecastle. But now every Japanese gun turns on the Johnston. Shells the size of Volkswagens tear into the sea around her. One hits forward of the bridge, blowing out a turret and killing 9 men instantly. Shrapnel cuts through the radio room. Still, Johnston keeps fighting her gunners, shouting over the roar. "Hit that bastard again, keep the smoke going." In the distance, Admiral Kurita watches from the bridge of the Yamato, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. His staff officers crowd around the plotting board. They cannot understand what they're seeing: a handful of American destroyers charging head-on into a battleship line 20 times stronger. Serenade says they are escort carriers. They cannot fight like this. Kurita's jaw tightens. Then explain why they are. Behind Johnston, the small carriers continue launching plane after plane, unarmed Avengers taking off with only depth charges. Wildcats stripped of ammunition diving through enemy fire to distract gunners. As the morning sun burns through the haze, the sky fills with smoke tracers and the glint of aluminum wings. The hunters of the Imperial Navy have become the hunted, and the destroyer Johnston, bleeding and burning, is still charging straight into them. 0715 hours. The Pacific horizon over Samar burns with smoke and sunlight. Through the murk, specks of silver and grey rise from the decks of Taffy 3's escort carriers. The sound grows from a scattered roar to a thunderous chorus, the last-minute scramble of every plane they can get airborne. On USS Street. Low Ensign George Brown's TBM Avenger lumbers down the flight deck, barely lifting its torpedo-laden belly clear of the waves. His gunner, Petty Officer Lyle Weaver, leans into the intercom. "Sir, we've got depth charges instead of armor-piercing ordnance." Brown's reply is steady. "Then we'll drop them close enough to matter." The carrier decks vanish beneath drifting smoke as the small task force becomes a storm of motion. Wildcats climb into the sun. Avengers roll low over the sea. The pilots have no illusions. They are flying against the Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, and a dozen cruisers, the surviving core of Japan's once invincible battle fleet. Down below, the sea convulses under the Japanese bombardment. Shells from Kongo and Haruna tear across the water, their wakes like molten trails. One salvo finds its mark on USS Gambia Bay. A direct hit to her engine room shakes the carrier from keel to bridge. Black smoke erupts from her side as she slows. Her crew scrambles with fire hoses and ammunition carts, men shouting over the clanging alarm bells. Engine room hit pressure, dropping. "Keep her steady, launch. Everything we've got." Meanwhile, Commander Evans aboard Johnston is bleeding from shrapnel, one hand wrapped in a bandage improvised from a sailor's torn shirt. His bridge glass is shattered, his forward turret destroyed, yet he keeps issuing orders, voice, raw eyes locked on the enemy. Maintain course. Range to those cruisers, 6,000 yards. Then let's finish what we started. Johnston's remaining guns hammer at the lead cruiser Chokai, whose return fire flashes like lightning in a storm. The destroyer's gunners, their faces blackened by powder, cheer as one shell hits Chokai's forward turret, setting off a secondary explosion. High above American planes begin their attack runs. The first Avengers dive in from 9,000 feet, releasing depth charges and 500-pound bombs at point-blank range. A formation of Wildcats streaks across the enemy line, strafing bridge windows and anti-aircraft crews. From the Yamato's bridge, Admiral Kurita watches tracers arc through the sky. The scene is chaos, his flagship surrounded by walls of white spray, the air filled with smoke trails and falling wreckage. A junior officer shouts, "Enemy planes, they're everywhere." Kurita frowns. Everywhere, from those toy carriers. At 0735 hours, Streetlow's Avengers find the Chikuma a heavy cruiser. One bomb hits near her aft deck, sending flames rolling down her stern. Then an Avenger's depth charge detonates just below her waterline. The cruiser staggers, slowing, listing hard to port. Within minutes, she's a burning silhouette, slipping beneath the waves. In the middle of this maelstrom, USS Heermann, the last surviving destroyer still maneuvering freely, darts out from a smokescreen and charges. Her skipper, Commander Amos Hathaway, orders a torpedo attack against the battleship Haruna. The torpedoes streak through the foam, one exploding near Haruna's bow, spraying columns of water 100 feet high. On the Japanese bridge, shock spreads. The Americans are not running, they are attacking. At 0800 hours, another salvo slams into Gambier Bay. The carrier's forward section erupts in smoke and fire. Captain Vuegg gives the order no sailor wants to hear abandon ship. Sailors leap into the oil-slicked sea as Japanese shells continue to fall around them. But even as Gambier Bay dies, her air crews are still attacking from above. A radio transmission crackles through the chaos, the voice of Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague, commander of Taffy. 3. All ships open fire. We are under attack by a large enemy surface force. This is not a drill. In those few desperate minutes, the Americans transform their weakness into fury. Every ship carrier, destroyer, escort turns its guns skyward or seaward and fights. The sea around Samar becomes a cauldron of smoke, flame, and defiance. And as the clock passes 0815, even the Japanese admiral begins to wonder if what he's seeing is possible, if these tiny jeep carriers and their destroyer escorts might actually survive. 0818 hours. The horizon has vanished behind a towering wall of smoke and shellfire. Waves slap against the shattered hulls of Taffy 3's ships as the Japanese center force closes in from the northwest. On board the USS Hole, the deck trembles under the recoil of her 5-inch guns. Powder smoke burns the air. The gun crews are running on pure adrenaline, soaked in sweat and seawater. Commander Leon Kintberger shouts across the bridge, "We'll draw their fire. Give the carriers time to get clear." The Hole turns hard toward the Japanese line, straight into a formation of heavy cruisers. A lookout spots them through the haze. That's the Chokai again, and something bigger behind her. Kintberger gives the order without hesitation. Fire torpedoes. 5 silver streaks leap from the Hole's port tubes, slicing through the Seng, churning sea. Seconds later, a sheet of flame blossoms along Chokai's side, a perfect hit. Her bridge erupts a geyser of smoke and twisted metal. The cruiser's guns fall silent, but the counterfire is instant. A shell from Congo smashes through Hole's forward deck, igniting her number 1 turret and sending burning debris across the bridge. The blast throws Kintberger to the deck. "Damage control to forward magazines," someone screams. "We've lost steering." Through shattered glass, sailors see the Johnston limping nearby, still fighting with 2 functioning guns. Her hull is pocked with shell holes, her topside wrecked, but she refuses to die. Evans, one arm bleeding freely, still barks orders. "Keep shooting, damn it. Aim low under the armor belt." Each gun crew acts on instinct. They know every shot could be their last. Gunners crank their mounts by hand, shouting bearings, firing blind through the smoke. Shells whistle overhead, the Yamato's 18-inch guns, the largest in naval history, their impacts shaking the sea itself. When those monster rounds land, they throw up columns of water that tower like skyscrapers. The concussion flattens sailors on deck, knocks helmets loose, and leaves ears bleeding. But each time the American ships emerge from the spray still alive. From his command post on the Yamato, Admiral Takeo Kurita watches through binoculars, jaw tight. His staff officers are astonished. "Sir, these are destroyers and escort carriers. They should not still be fighting." Kurita lowers his glasses. "They fight like fleet carriers," he says quietly, "and they die like samurai." Above, the sky is alive with streaking aircraft. Wildcats dive through flak to strafe the enemy decks. Avengers circle low, their bomb racks empty, but still charging to distract the Japanese gunners. Pilots report over the radio. Out of ammo, making dry runs, one Wildcat pilot, Lieutenant Ralph Brayley, describes it later. "We didn't have bullets left, so we dove anyway. I flew straight at a cruiser's bridge to make him duck. I could see their faces. That's how close we were." At 0830, the destroyer Heermann, last of Taffy, Three's tin cans still at speed races between the carriers and the advancing enemy line. Her captain, Commander Amos Hathaway, orders torpedoes to stand by to launch on the battleships. The torpedoes streak out, angled toward the Yamato herself. One misses astern by mere yards, but the near miss forces Kurita to turn his entire column away, a maneuver that breaks his formation just as his ships are gaining range. For a fleeting moment, the Japanese line of battle disintegrates. Inside the American formation, Admiral Sprague's voice crackles over the fleet frequency. That battleships turning away, keep pressing, keep hitting them. The surviving carriers street. Low White Plains and Fanshaw Bay now run flat out to the southeast. They're nearly out of planes, decks littered with shell fragments and fire hoses. Yet they continue to launch what little they have, unarmed aircraft, even maintenance planes stripped of seats to carry extra fuel. Anything that can fly flies. In the chaos, the Gambia Bay takes another salvo amidships. Her list increases sharply. Water floods her engine room. Captain Vuegg gives the order at 0845 abandon ship. She begins to roll her flight deck, vanishing beneath the waves. The men in the water look back and see a strange, unforgettable sight, a small carrier sinking under the shadow of the Yamato, yet her flag still flying. The Japanese fleet bears down for the kill. But now the sky above them hums with vengeful aircraft. Every Avenger, every Wildcat, every bomber. Taffy 3 has left circling back for one more strike. At 0850, the impossible battle for Samar reaches its fever pitch, and the hunters of the Imperial Navy are about to become the hunted. The Pacific roars like a forge. The air is thick with cordite and vaporized salt, the sea beaten into chaos by exploding shells. From the shattered destroyer, USS Johnston, smoke pours from a gaping wound amidships. Her decks are slick with oil and blood. Still, she fights. Commander Ernest Evans staggers across the bridge, face streaked with soot. His voice rasps through the ship's intercom. "We're going back in. Those carriers still need us." The men stare at him in disbelief. The Johnston is half dead. Her fire control systems destroyed her radar out. But they follow his order without hesitation. They know what kind of man he is. The destroyer lurches into another attack, run guns blazing manually. Her gunners crank the turrets by hand, sending 5-inch shells slamming into the cruiser Kumano. Flames bloom along the Japanese ship's stern. Every impact is cheered like a miracle. Then comes the answering fire. A salvo from Yamato straddles the Johnston. One shell lands close enough to lift the entire ship out of the water. Men are hurled against bulkheads. Lights flicker, then die. Shrapnel slices through the engine room. The destroyer shudders, slows, then steadies. Evans hauls himself back to the bridge rail. "Steady, boys," he growls. "We're still in the fight." Behind him, the sky fills with the shapes of returning American aircraft. Avengers come in low, their propellers shimmering in the sunlight. Out of fuel and ammunition, they dive anyway, harassing, strafing, bluffing with empty guns. Each pass forces Japanese gunners to duck, breaking their aim. One pilot radios from overhead. "This is Ensign Tom Brown. No bombs left. I'm making a dummy run. Tell the destroyers I'll keep their heads down." Below, Brown's plane screams over the decks of the Haruna, close enough to rattle her superstructure. The gunners open fire, wildly wasting ammunition. Moments later, a real Avenger swoops in behind him and plants a 500-pound bomb dead center. Inside Admiral Kurita's flagship Yamato, chaos reigns. The flagship's plotting room is a blur of conflicting reports. Multiple cruisers hit, one sunk, and torpedo tracks sighted everywhere. Officers shout over each other. Enemy carriers to port, smoke screens ahead. Destroyers attacking again. Kurita grips the edge of the map table. His staff can see the strain in his eyes. These were supposed to be easy kills, helpless jeep carriers. Instead, his fleet has been fighting for nearly 2 hours against a phantom enemy that refuses to die. The hull, now ablaze from bow to stern, continues to fire. Her captain, Kintberger, stands on the wing of the bridge as the last torpedo is launched. "Let's see if this one counts," he shouts. A moment later, an enormous explosion shakes the distant cruiser. Suzuya struck amidships. Seconds later, a countersalvo hits the Hoel, squarely tearing her in half. She slips beneath the waves, still firing as she goes down. At 0900 hours, the destroyer Heermann, the only American ship still maneuvering, freely emerges from the smoke-trading broadsides with the battleship Congo. Her shells bounce harmlessly off armor, but her defiance buys precious minutes. Her crew sings the Navy hymn over the sound of the guns. Behind them, the remaining carriers Street, Low White Plains and Fanshaw Bay continue to run south at full speed. Their decks are scarred, their elevators jammed, but their crews work like madmen to recover and relaunch what planes they can. In the air, a handful of Avengers and Wildcats circle like angry hornets. Down below, the sea is littered with burning wrecks and life rafts. Survivors of the Gambia Bay watch the battle from the water. They see the Johnston charging again and again, a blackened silhouette swallowed by smoke. One sailor whispers, "That's our skipper, still fighting." At 0920, the Johnston's final salvo is fired. Her guns fall silent, her power gone. Evans gives the order, abandon ship. Then turning to his crew, he adds, "Give 'em everything you've got before you go." Minutes later, a final shell slams through the bridge. The ship rolls her flag, still flying as the sea claims her. But in dying, the destroyers have done the impossible. They've broken the momentum of Japan's mighty center force. The ocean that was supposed to run red with American ships now runs with Japanese oil. Kurita watches the carnage through his binoculars. Around him, the wrecks of Chokai, Chikuma, and Suzuya burn. The once proud battle line is shattered, scattered across the sea. The Admiral lowers his glasses. "We will withdraw," he says quietly. His staff stare at him, stunned. "We can do no more good here." At 0930, the Japanese fleet turns north, leaving behind a handful of battered, smoking ships that refuse to die. The battle is not yet over, but for the men of Taffy, victory has been written in fire and courage. The sea east of Samar is strewn with wreckage, black smoke spiraling into a sky thick with drifting ash. Oil slicks glimmer with fire. Men float among debris, clutching life rafts, praying for rescue. Yet above them, the fight still rages. From the flight deck of USS Street, low smoke pours from shell impacts that had gouged through the steel. Captain Francis McKenna leans over the rail as a final wave of Avengers lifts off. "That's the last of them," his air officer reports. "Every plane we've got is in the air." "Good," McKenna says quietly. "Let's make sure they've got something to come back to." The surviving carriers Fanshaw Bay, White Plains and Street, Low form a loose, battered triangle, still laying smoke and firing every gun they have left. Even 5-inch dual-purpose guns meant for air defense now hammer at Japanese cruisers 5 miles away. Ammunition runners pass shells hand to hand. Men cheer with every near miss. At 0945, a formation of Avengers returns from the attack on Suzuya. They report the cruiser afire, and dead in the water, her magazines cooking off. Chikuma is gone. Chokai is gone. Half of Kurita's heavy cruisers destroyed by ships that weren't supposed to survive 10 minutes. From the Yamato, the reality sinks in. Admiral Kurita's staff officers crowd around the plotting board, their expressions grim. "We've lost formation, cohesion, communications are broken. We can't identify friendly ships in this smoke," one reports. Kurita's eyes linger on the compass repeater. For hours he's ordered advance after advance, and now his fleet is a maze of confusion. He turns to his operations officer. "Signal all ships reverse course. We withdraw northward." A murmur spreads through the flagship. "Withdraw," one young staff officer blurts out. "But sir, we've nearly broken through." Kurita's reply is quiet but final. "Those ships are dying men who do not know it yet, but they fight with the power of a fleet. We will not waste what we have left." At 1000 Task Unit 77.4, 3 watches the impossible unfold. The Japanese fleet, hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and firepower, turns away. The great battleships Yamato, Nagato, Kongo and Haruna recede into the haze. The roar of their guns fades. On the bridge of Fanshaw Bay, Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague lowers his binoculars, disbelief in his eyes. "They're retreating," he mutters. Then louder, almost to himself, "By God, we made them run." Sailors break into spontaneous cheers, some laughing hysterically, others weeping. They had stared down the most powerful surface fleet on Earth and lived. But the cost is terrible. USS Johnston gone. USS Howell gone. USS Samuel B. Roberts, the smallest destroyer that ever fought, gone. but not before firing every shell and every torpedo she carried. Hundreds of sailors now drift in the open sea, clinging to wreckage. Among them floats Ernest Evans. No one sees him go. Witnesses last recall him standing waist-deep in water on the Johnston's fantail, shouting orders to abandon ship, his face smeared with oil and blood. When the destroyer finally slips beneath the waves, he vanishes with her. For his valor, he will later receive the Medal of Honor posthumously. By 10:30, the air war winds down. The last Avengers from Taffy 3 return to their carriers riddled with bullet holes, fuel almost gone. One by one, they land on the scarred decks, greeted by cheering deck crews. Some can't make it, they ditch alongside and rescue boats haul them in. At 1100, silence settles over Samar. The great sea battle, unequal in every measurable way, is over. The Japanese center force has been turned back. Across the fleet intercom, a voice breaks the quiet. This is Taffy 3. The enemy is retreating north. Repeat, the enemy is retreating. Applause ripples through every surviving ship. Gunners embrace. Deck crews collapse where they stand. Pilots, their hands still trembling from combat, climb out of their cockpits into sunlight. Aboard Street Low, Captain McKenna looks out over the burning sea. His XO says softly, "Sir, you realize what this means?" McKenna nods. "It means those boys on the destroyers didn't die for nothing." But the battle's final act has not yet played out. In the distance, dark specks are forming on the horizon plains, dozens of them flying low. No one knows yet that they are Japanese, and among them are the first kamikaze of the day. The men of Taffy, 3 barely alive, brace themselves once more. The morning calm shatters once again. Lookouts aboard USS Street Low call out almost in unison. Aircraft inbound low from the west. Admiral Sprague whirls toward the horizon. Black dots are rising above the smoke. First a dozen, then 20. The radar confirms it. More Japanese aircraft sweeping in just as the surface fleet turns away. But these aren't ordinary planes. They're flying low, steady and silent. A radio man shouts, "Sir, no response to IFF, they're not ours." On the flight deck of Street Low, the exhausted gunners reload, faces grey from powder smoke. Their barrels are overheated from the morning's defence. Many of them still have blood on their uniforms from the earlier shelling. Captain Francis McKenna's voice echoes through the loudspeakers. "General quarters, prepare to repel air attack. This is not over." From the west, Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bombers sweep in sunlight, glinting off their canopies. The Japanese pilots have been circling, waiting for the right moment. They see the American carriers damaged, slowed, and alone. Each pilot carries a final letter folded into his flight suit. Farewell to family, honor to the Emperor. They are the Special Attack Corps Kamikaze. The first dives straight at Fanshaw Bay, dropping a bomb that detonates close off her port side. The shockwave sprays the deck with fragments. The next 3 zero in on white planes. Her gunners open up with every weapon, 40mm, Bofors, 20mm, Oerlikons, even rifles, and miraculously one attacker disintegrates mid-dive. The debris skims the flight deck and slides into the sea. But one pilot, Ensign Takashi Nakahara, just 19, dives straight for Street Low. He pushes the throttle to full propeller, screaming. His final words are a single phrase broadcast in Japanese, "May I serve His Majesty forever." At 1,107 hours, he crashes directly into the flight deck. His 500-pound bomb detonates deep within the hangar bay. The explosion rips through the ship. Flames erupt through open elevators, licking across the deck. A second blast follows aviation fuel, then ordnance. The carrier's bow lifts violently, her entire forward section engulfed. McKenna is thrown across the bridge. All hands abandon ship. He bellows. The intercom crackles once, then dies. Sailors scramble for life rafts as ammunition cooks off around them. A wild chorus of detonations rocks the air, 1, 2, then dozens as parked aircraft explode like dominoes. The ship's island is consumed in a pillar of flame visible for miles. A gunner named Edward Kresisic later recalls, "The deck lifted under us. You could feel the whole ship screaming." By 11:25 Street, Low is mortally wounded. She lists sharply to starboard, her hangar bay glowing orange beneath the smoke. The remaining escort carriers turn away powerless to help. Fanshaw Bay radios Godspeed Street low. We'll pick up your men. At 1,130, her magazine detonates. A blast column nearly 1,000 feet high erupts into the air, a mushroom of flame and steel. The concussion rocks every ship in the formation. Where Street low once floated, there's only burning wreckage and drifting debris. Admiral Sprague stares at the plume from his bridge aboard Fanshaw Bay. His face is ashen, eyes glistening. That's the first American carrier lost to suicide attack, he says softly. In the aftermath, waves of survivors bob among flaming wreckage. Pilots, deckhands, medics, all adrift in oil and ash. Some sing to stay awake, others pray. Overhead, a lone Avenger circles its pilot, calling over the radio, "God help those boys in the water. They earned their wings today." The kamikaze assault subsides as quickly as it began. The surviving Japanese pilots, having spent their lives, vanish into the smoke. The remaining carriers, though scarred and battered, hold formation. The fires are fought back. The wounded are pulled from the water. By 1200, the battle is truly over. The sea is quiet again, save for the hiss of burning oil and the sound of waves against twisted steel. Taffy 3, the little task force that should have been annihilated, has survived. It has cost the enemy 3 heavy cruisers, damage to several battleships, and the complete failure of Admiral Kurita's plan to destroy the Leyte invasion fleet. Admiral Sprague sends a final transmission to the fleet. "We have engaged the enemy with all available aircraft and ships. Situation under control." A masterpiece of understatement for a battle historians would later call the miracle at Samar. But for the men who lived it, it was something more, a day when courage and sacrifice outmatched the weight of nations. October 25th, 1944, early afternoon. The waters off Samar shimmer with oily rainbow streaks. Fires still burn on the horizon where Street Low exploded, sending smoke spiraling into a sky gone strangely quiet. The sound of gunfire has faded to a distant echo, replaced by the lapping of waves against wreckage and the low hum of engines from rescue boats weaving between oil slicks and floating debris. For the men of Taffy 3, it feels like waking from a nightmare. The impossible has happened. The Japanese fleet is gone. The largest battleships ever built have turned away from what should have been their easiest victory. And now, against all reason, the shattered remnants of 6 escort carriers and a handful of destroyers still float alive in the shadow of annihilation. Aboard Fanshaw Bay, Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague stands on the charred bridge, a white bandage wrapped around his head. His uniform is streaked with soot, his eyes hollow but alert. He looks across the water at the scattered silhouettes of his surviving ships. His chief of staff murmurs, "Sir, that fleet out there, that was the heart of their navy." Sprague nods slowly. "And we broke it," he says. Then, after a long pause, "No, they did. The boys on those tin cans." Hours earlier, Sprague had watched in disbelief as Johnston Howell and Samuel B. Roberts charged into an enemy force 10 times their size. He saw the plumes of torpedoes, the eruptions of enemy ships, and the flashes where his own destroyers disappeared beneath the waves. Now he knows what it all brought, survival and victory far beyond anything strategy could have planned. At 1,300 hours, the radio crackles with reports from the Leyte beachhead. The invasion fleet remains untouched. General Douglas MacArthur, aboard his flagship off the coast, sends a message to the 7th Fleet. "Well done. The enemy has been repelled. The landings continue unimpeded." In the air, the last of Taffy 3's surviving planes circle low, guiding destroyer escorts toward life rafts. Pilots lean out of cockpits, dropping die markers and flares. Over 800 sailors drift in the open sea, some clinging to debris, others floating unconscious, coated in oil. The rescue will go on for days. One group of survivors from the Samuel B. Roberts watches as the sun dips toward the horizon. Their ship, nicknamed the smallest ship that fought the largest battle, had charged a Japanese heavy cruiser at full speed, firing so fast her guns overheated and cracked. They remember their skipper, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, shouting, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. But we will do what damage we can." And they did, crippling one cruiser, damaging another, and forcing an entire enemy division to turn away. Now those same men cling to each other in the fading light, their small corner of the sea glowing red with the last fires of battle. Aboard White Plains, sailors gather silently on the weather deck. Some weep openly, others just stare at the horizon. The ship's chaplain recites the Lord's Prayer over the loudspeaker, his voice steady, even as it cracks on the final line. On the bridge, an ensign looks at the scattered columns of smoke and says softly, "Sir, I think that's what winning looks like." By evening, the first rescue destroyers arrive. USS Dennis, USS Raymond, and USS John C. Butler themselves scarred from the fight. They lower boats hauling survivors aboard until the decks overflow. Many of the rescued are too weak to speak. Some clutch souvenirs, a chunk of torn decking, a scorched flag, a photo sealed in a waterproof wallet. Admiral Sprague sends a coded message to Admiral Kincaid at 7th Fleet Headquarters, enemy fleet in full retreat. Our loss is heavy. Courage of destroyers and pilots beyond all praise. Kincaid replies simply, "You have written a new chapter in naval history." That night, as the survivors are counted, the numbers become grimly clear. 3 destroyers and 1 escort carrier lost. Over 1,000 Americans dead. Yet the balance of power in the Pacific has shifted. Japan's last chance to destroy the American invasion fleet has vanished beneath the waves of Samar. Historians will later call it one of the most heroic stands in naval history. Admiral Kurita's fleet, 23 ships, including 4 battleships, turned back because they believed they were fighting full-sized fleet carriers and cruisers. In reality, they were facing 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, and a handful of men too stubborn to run. In the words of Admiral Sprague's after-action report, in no engagement of its size and length has the United States Navy shown greater gallantry, resourcefulness, and determination. Every man who fought there can be proud to say, "I was with Taffy, 3 at Samar." The sea grows calm again, lit only by the faint glow of burning oil drifting slowly away. The smell of salt, smoke, and sacrifice hangs in the air, the scent of victory paid for in blood and steel. October 26th, 1944. Dawn creeps over the Philippine Sea, painting the horizon in soft hues of orange and violet. The typhoon of war that raged over these waters has finally passed. What remains are twisted fragments of steel-burned rafts and silent men drifting amid the debris, the aftermath of the Battle off Samar, the smallest and most astonishing victory in the largest naval engagement in history, the Battle of Leyte. Gulf. Rescue ships comb the area, their searchlights slicing through morning mist. On board the destroyer, USS Dennis crewmen haul another group of survivors from the oil-slicked waves, sailors from the Johnston and Howell, eyes glazed and skin blistered by sun and salt. Many have been floating for nearly a full day, surrounded by the ghosts of their fallen ships. A medic kneels beside a wounded seaman wrapping a makeshift bandage. "You're safe now," he whispers. The sailor doesn't answer. He stares out across the horizon and murmurs, "The Johnston never quit, not once." Elsewhere on the deck of Fanshaw Bay, Admiral Sprague writes his preliminary report by hand, his knuckles raw from gripping binoculars through hours of shellfire. The report is brief but searing. The enemy's superior force of battleships and cruisers was driven off by escort carriers and destroyers. The conduct of officers and men was beyond any standard of valor. Word of the battle spreads quickly through the fleet, and disbelief follows. Officers aboard the heavy cruiser USS Portland, 200 miles south, stare at the incoming signals. One lieutenant mutters, "They sent destroyer escorts against battleships, and they won." At Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz reads the first official account. He simply says, "That's the kind of Navy we have." For the men who fought the victory feels personal, not strategic. It was not won by overwhelming power, but by grit and improvisation. Torpedoes fired in desperation. Wildcats attacking with empty guns, sailors reloading deck weapons by hand. They had no right to win, yet somehow they did. 2 days later, a funeral service is held aboard the USS White Plains. The chaplain stands beneath a tattered American flag that had flown through the battle. Around him, sailors in stained uniforms bow their heads as the names of the lost are read. Each name is followed by a solemn toll of the ship's bell. The roll call lasts over 10 minutes. When the final bell fades, a hush lingers over the deck. Then someone begins to hum softly. Eternal Father strong to save. One by one, voices join in, carried by the sea breeze that whispers through the shattered antenna rigging. Hundreds of miles away, Admiral Takeo Kurita stands on the bridge of the Yamato, now returning to Brunei. He has not slept since the battle. His staff remains silent, afraid to speak. He knows his retreat will be questioned by Tokyo, perhaps even condemned. But he also knows the truth. Had he continued, his fleet would have been destroyed by air power and submarines waiting beyond Samar. His decision spared thousands of Japanese sailors, but ended Japan's last hope for a decisive naval victory. Kurita turns toward the east, where the sun rises behind the grey horizon, and whispers to himself, "Those little carriers, they fought with the heart of tigers." In the United States, news of the battle reaches home in fragments, brief dispatches at first, then full stories of the Taffy 3 miracle. Newspapers print the now immortal headline, "Tin Cans take on battleships and win." Families of the fallen read letters written weeks before the battle, filled with casual optimism and jokes about the weather. Wives and mothers hang on every word, unaware that their sons became legends in the hours after those letters were sent. Among the posthumous heroes is Commander Ernest Edwin Evans of the USS Johnston, who will be awarded the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary gallantry. The citation reads, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, in the face of overwhelming odds. He had charged a fleet 20 times stronger and given his life to save thousands." His crew would later say, "The skipper couldn't ask us to do anything. He wouldn't do himself. He led us all the way in." For decades to come, naval cadets at Annapolis will study the battle as a lesson in courage, not strategy, not firepower, but the will to fight when logic says you shouldn't. The Battle of Samar would mark the final time in history that battleships engaged in full-scale surface combat. It was the twilight of an era, the day the world learned that the courage of men and the reach of aircraft had eclipsed the age of armor and guns. As dusk falls on October 26th, the sea that had burned with fury now glows with sunset gold. The shattered remnants of Taffy 3 steam slowly toward Leyte Gulf, battered, bleeding, but unbroken. From the deck of Fanshaw Bay, Admiral Sprague watches the horizon and quietly says to his XO, "Tell them, the little boys won today." The XO nods, tears streaking through the grime on his face. "Aye, sir," he says softly. The little boys won. November 1944. The war rolls on across the Pacific, but among those who know, the sea whispers of Samar spread like gospel. Sailors aboard destroyers, carrier decks, and submarines repeat the tale in hushed, reverent tones, how a handful of tin cans and jeep carriers stood against the core of the Japanese fleet and won. They call it the miracle at Samar. In Manila Bay, a Navy chaplain pens a letter to his family. "I have seen courage before, but never like this." Those boys fought as if the ocean itself were on their side. Admiral Sprague's official report reaches Washington in mid-November. The pages are scorched and water-stained, written partly by hand because typewriters had jammed with salt and smoke. It details the improbable destroyers, charging battleships, carriers launching planes with no bombs, and sailors who refused to die quietly. When Fleet Admiral Nimitz reads it, he circles one line in red pencil. In no previous action has the Navy shown greater gallantry. The Battle of Leyte Gulf ends Japan's dream of contesting sea power. The Yamato and her sister ships retreat north, never again to threaten an American landing. Japan's last hope to repel MacArthur's return to the Philippines dies in those waters. But for the men who lived through it, the cost of victory endures. Survivors drifted for days before rescue, surrounded by oil, blood, and sharks. Some never came home. For those who did, the memories remain carved into their minds: the whistle of shells, the taste of salt and cordite, the sight of ships dying in fire yet refusing to sink. On December 9th, 1944, at a makeshift memorial service aboard USS White Plains, survivors from Taffy 3 gather to honor their fallen. A chaplain stands at the edge of the deck, the sea calm and mirror-like beneath him. Beside him, a new flag, bright, unstained, flutters in the breeze. They faced impossible odds, he says. They did not flinch. They did not yield. They fought for each other, and in so doing they saved a fleet and perhaps the war itself. As the final prayer ends, sailors step forward one by one to cast wreaths and makeshift crosses into the water. Each piece of driftwood, each handful of flowers is a promise that the names Johnston Hole and Samuel B. Roberts will never be forgotten. In the years that follow, the legend only grows. Historians would write of Admiral Kurita's hesitation, how he had been deceived into believing he faced a full US carrier fleet. But those who were there know the truth. It wasn't deception that stopped the Japanese, it was defiance. Commander Robert Copeland of the Samuel B. Roberts would later tell a Navy reunion crowd, this was not the story of ships, but of men. Ships are just steel and rivets. Courage is what makes them alive. For his leadership and sacrifice, Commander Ernest Evans becomes the first Native American in the US Navy to receive the Medal of Honor. His crewmen, those who lived to tell the story, speak of him with quiet awe. He said, "We'd go in and fight like hell," one survivor recalls, and that's exactly what we did. Admiral Kurita would live to old age haunted by Samar. In later interviews, he admitted, "I believed we were facing fleet carriers. I could not imagine such courage from escort ships. They fought to the death. It was magnificent and terrible." The wrecks of Taffy 3's ships lie today on the ocean floor, silent steel tombs resting beneath nearly 2,000 feet of Pacific darkness. In 2019, explorers found the USS Johnston, her hull shattered but her flag still faintly visible on the bow. The name was still there, Johnston DD 557. As the remotely operated camera drifted past her rusted guns, a silence filled the control room aboard the research vessel. One of the operators whispered, "She's still on patrol." In that moment, the past felt alive again, the roar of the guns, the courage of the men, the defiance of the hopeless. The Battle off Samar remains one of the most extraordinary testaments to human courage ever recorded at sea. It was proof that bravery, discipline, and self-sacrifice can defy even the laws of war. When the official history of the US Navy was written, it dedicated a single line to that morning off the Philippines. They fought against overwhelming odds and saved a fleet from destruction. For sheer heroism, there is nothing finer in our naval annals. And for those who served in Taffy 3, those who faced battleships with 5-inch guns and courage that defied reason, there is no higher truth. October 25th, 1944. The day the smallest ships in the world's largest navy made history. The day courage outgunned steel.